It had to have been at least a decade ago, maybe even longer, back when I was still trying to be the kind of guy who fit in downtown on a Friday night. I'm sure you know the type. Skinny jeans, slick hair, enough confidence to choke a bull. At least until I was actually in the middle of a crowd. The city's nightlife had this reputation. Clubs with neon strobes spilling out onto the sidewalks. Dive bars where every drink came with a story. And enough late-night food trucks to keep the scene alive until the first light of dawn. And that's where I was headed. Or at least, that was the plan. And it started with one wrong turn. I'd been walking for blocks now, following this loose mental map of where the action was. But in my eagerness, or maybe my stupidity, I missed a key intersection. A left I should have taken. Instead, I found myself in the quieter part of town. At first, I didn't think too much about it. I'd always been a sucker for old buildings and strange streets. I figured, what the hell? I can backtrack soon enough. The architecture around here was different. The bars and modern facades gave way to brick and stone buildings, almost leaning over the narrow streets themselves. Some of them had plaques by the door, dates etched into the metal. Built in 1908. Restored in 1923. Others seemed to be defiant against time, windows dark and empty. I stopped underneath a flickering street lamp, trying to reorient myself. My phone's GPS was useless, the blue dot spinning like it couldn't decide where I actually was. Typical. Okay, I told myself. Relax. This is just another quirky part of the city's charm. The sounds of the bustling city seemed to fade behind me, though. No more laughter echoing from open doorways. No hum of distant traffic. Even my footsteps seemed muted against the cracked pavement. And that's when I saw the church. At first glance, it didn't even look real, like something out of a fever dream or an old Gothic novel. The whole thing was brick, dark and aged. A towering spire stretched into the night sky, piercing it with eerie precision. The roof was metal, a black so deep it seemed to swallow the faint glow from the stars. I stopped in my tracks, staring up at the massive wooden doors atop a short set of stairs. They were arched and heavy, framed by intricate carvings of saints and angels. It was hard to tell in the dim light, though. This wasn't just a building. It was like a presence. I don't know why I felt drawn to it, but I did. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the sense that stepping inside would somehow reset my whole night, like a checkpoint in a video game. I'd been raised Catholic, though I hadn't set foot in a church in many years. But churches were safe, weren't they? A sanctuary. A place where even the worst kind of lost could find their way. I climbed those steps slow and deliberate. The door was enormous, its iron handle cold under my palm. I gave it a tentative push, not really expecting it to open, but it did. The door groaned as it swung inward, revealing a dimly lit vestibule that smelled faintly of incense and old wood. In that moment, I hesitated, expecting somebody to rush out and demand what I was doing here. But the place remained silent. I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me. The air was cooler in here, heavy with that ancient church scent of wax, dust, and stone. The main hall stretched before me, cavernous and empty. Rows of hard wooden pews lined either side of a narrow aisle. At the far end, an altar stood bathed in shadow, flanked by tall, dark statues, whose features were impossible to make out. For a brief moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. The architecture was stunning, like faded grandeur that hinted at better days long gone. Stained glass windows lined the walls. A beautiful, carved wooden balcony loomed above, running along the upper edge of the hall, its railings ornate with Gothic patterns. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe just a moment to catch my breath, to center myself before heading back out into the maze of streets. My eyes caught on a small wooden shelf mounted on the wall near the entrance. It was lined with unlit candles inside glass jars. A sign above it read, "Light a candle for your prayer. Suggested donation, $1. It felt quaint, charming even. I pulled out a crumpled dollar bill from my pocket, slid it into the metal slot, and selected a candle. Striking a match from the box provided, I lit the wick and watched the tiny flame flicker to life. "Here's hoping I find my way," I muttered, half to myself, half to whatever forces might be listening. As the flame steadied, I turned my attention back to the hall. Curiosity pulled me forward, past the rows of pews, and toward a small spiral staircase tucked into the corner near the altar. The wrought iron steps spiraled high above into the balcony, their edges worn smooth by decades, maybe centuries, of use. I hesitated at the base, glancing back toward the entrance. It was still there, a dark rectangle of safety inside this otherwise suffocating space. That staircase seemed to call to me. Maybe it was the allure of seeing the hall from above, or maybe it was just the thrill of exploring a place I wasn't supposed to be. Either way, I found myself climbing. The steps creaked softly under my weight. When I reached the top, I stepped out onto the balcony and leaned over the railing, looking down at the hall below. It was beautiful in its own way, the candlelight casting long, flickering shadows across the pews and the altar. And then I saw another candle. It was among the row of candles near the shelf at the entrance. Mine was still burning steadily, its flame warm and bright. But right next to it, another candle was lit. I hadn't noticed it before. I was sure of that. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. I was not alone. My gaze darted to the staircase, and my heart nearly stopped. Cast against the wall at the base of the stairs was a shadow, tall and broad, distinctly human. But the proportions were off. The shoulders seemed far too wide, the arms far too long. It just stood there, motionless, waiting. Hello? My voice echoed, brittle and weak. I got no response. I slowly moved back toward the steps. The shadow remained where it was, unmoving but somehow oppressive, daring me to come closer. When I reached the top of the staircase, I peered down cautiously. There was nobody there. The shadow had vanished. I descended the stairs as quickly as I could, scanning the hall, expecting to see somebody, anybody. But it was empty. And then, out of nowhere, the lights went out. The sudden darkness was absolute and suffocating. My heart thundered in my chest as I stood frozen, listening. Somewhere off in the distance, I thought I heard a faint shuffling sound, like feet dragging against stone. The only light came from the row of candles near the entrance, their flames flickering weakly in the darkness. I turned toward them, eyes straining to see. And that's when I heard the voice. Low, guttural. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Get the fuck out of here." I whipped around, my eyes darting to the ceiling, where a dark shape now loomed above me. It moved with slow, deliberate grace, limbs impossibly long, face still obscured by shadow. Surely it was just a shadow cast against the ceiling, but it sure looked like something was crawling across the stone above me. Panic surged through me. I bolted for the door, my hands fumbling at the heavy iron handle, yanking and pulling, but it wouldn't budge. And for a terrifying moment, I thought I was going to die here, in the dark, with that thing. Then I remembered the lock. I reached down, found the bolt, and slid it open. The door swung outward, and I stumbled out into the street. I staggered on the sidewalk, gulping down the cold night air like it was the first I'd ever tasted. The world outside felt stark and flat, almost surreal. I turned back toward the church, half expecting to see that thing standing in the doorway, its two long arms reaching out for me. But there was nothing, just the dark rectangle of an open door, yawning like a black hole. The interior inside was utterly still, the candlelight now barely visible from the street. My breath clouded out in front of me as I listened, straining to hear any sign of pursuit. And for a long moment it was just silence. Then, faintly, from within the church, came the sound of footsteps, deliberate, unhurried. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I did not want to see what would happen next. I turned and started quickly walking down the street. I glanced over my shoulder, stomach clenched. The church door was closed now. I never heard it slam shut. The street behind me was empty, but it still felt like something was there, just out of sight. I quickened my pace, my pulse pounding in my ears. My legs ached, my lungs burned from the exertion, but I didn't stop until I reached the next intersection. Without thinking, I turned right and kept walking, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that cursed building. A neon glow appeared ahead of me, faint at first but growing brighter with every step. It was a bar, just what I'd been looking for earlier. The sign over the door flickered in and out, buzzing faintly in the still night air. I stepped inside. The warm hum of conversation and clinking glass washed over me. The place was small, crowded but cozy, with a long wooden bar stretching along one wall and a scattering of small tables. A jukebox in the corner played an old rock ballad, its tinny melody barely audible over the din. I slowly slid into one of the stools at the bar. A bartender, a middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard, raised an eyebrow as he approached. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, setting down a napkin in front of me. Yeah, something like that," I muttered. "Beer, please. Whatever's on tap." He nodded and poured me a pint, the amber liquid foaming at the top. I took a long pull, the cold bitterness grounding me slightly. I noticed my hands were still shaking, and I couldn't quite banish the image of that thing from my mind. Pulling out my phone, I opened my browser and typed in the name of the street where I'd seen that church. I scrolled through the results, searching for anything, a history, a legend, even just a mention of its existence. But there was nothing. I frowned and tried again, this time adding haunted to the search. Still nothing. No photos, no stories, no record of a church like that ever even being there. I set my phone down, a chill creeping over me despite the warmth of the bar. That didn't make sense. I was just there. I'd seen it, felt it. No one had ever gotten the creeps like that in a place that didn't exist. But maybe it was better this way. Maybe some places were just meant to remain forgotten, their secrets buried in the dark where they belonged. I drained the rest of my beer, left a tip on the counter, and stepped back out into the night. I didn't look back as I walked away from the bar. The memory of that shadowy spire burned deep in my mind. It was supposed to be a simple trip, just a housewarming party for my buddy Luke and his fiancée Emma. Abby and I had spent most of that afternoon preparing. A casserole was bubbling in its dish. A bottle of wine was nestled in a gift bag, both sitting on the counter as we hurried around the house. "You got the directions, right?" Abby said, slipping on her shoes while I stuffed the casserole into a travel case. "I thought you did," I said, grinning. Her laugh was sharp but good-natured. "Typical. Fine. I'll just pull it up when we get in the car." We loaded up the car, and Abby, in the passenger seat, scrolled through her phone while I backed us out of the driveway. It was late afternoon, and the sun had already begun its slow descent. The plan was simple: An hour-long drive, a few drinks, some laughter, and then drive home before midnight. Hopefully. Got it, Abby said, holding her phone up triumphantly. GPS says we'll be there in 58 minutes. That was the last time I felt confident about the entire evening. 20 minutes in, the directions started getting weird. The GPS had us take a turn onto a narrow 2-lane road flanked by tall pines. This can't be right, I said, glancing at Abby. She frowned at her phone. It says we're on track. Luke did say it was kind of out of the way, remember? Yeah, sure, but this feels like we're in the middle of nowhere. The road continued to wind and twist, trees closing in tighter. Every so often, a mailbox or small farmhouse would appear in the distance, but those grew fewer and farther between. The houses were older out here, some with peeling paint and sagging porches. I adjusted my grip on the wheel, faint unease settling in my chest. At a stop sign, we took a left as instructed, and the pavement turned to dirt. The sound of gravel crunching under the tires was unnervingly loud. All right, I'm serious, this can't be right, I said again. Abby peered out the window. Let's just give it a couple more miles. If we don't see anything, we'll turn around. Reluctantly, I nodded. The headlights cast long, shifting shadows as we pressed on into the dark. That dirt road seemed endless, the headlights almost struggling to cut through the thickening darkness, playing tricks on my tired eyes. Abby leaned forward, her face illuminated by the glow of her screen. We've been lost for, maybe 40 minutes? I checked the dashboard clock and nodded. At least, I think it's time to turn back now. She hesitated, then pointed ahead. Let's just give it one more mile. I swear Luke said the place was just tucked away. We passed over train tracks, the car jostling as the tires thudded against the wood and steel. A shiver ran through me. I couldn't explain why, but the sight of those tracks filled me with dread. I felt like we'd crossed a line we weren't supposed to. Are you sure about this? I said, my grip tightening on the wheel. Abby didn't answer right away. Instead, she was staring out the passenger window, her brow furrowed. It's so dark out here, she murmured. Then I saw a street lamp, its light pale yellow, glowing faintly at the edge of the road like a beacon. Beyond it, there was nothing but black. That's it, I said firmly, slowing the car. We've gone way too far. Abby didn't argue. She just nodded. Yeah, I guess it's time to turn around. As I prepared to reverse, though, something moved off in the distance. What the hell, I said. 2 figures emerged from the darkness beyond that street lamp. They walked slowly, their movements deliberate as they stepped into the light. I could see them more clearly now. They looked tall, impossibly tall, and thin. Their faces were obscured by the shadows of wide-brimmed hats. Their clothes seemed old-fashioned, something out of a 19th century photograph. Long coats, boots that looked worn and dusty. Abby gasped aloud. Who are they? I have no idea, I said. Those figures stopped directly beneath the street lamp. One of them raised a hand, beckoning us forward with a slow, deliberate motion. Hell no, I said, throwing the car into reverse before I could move, though. A sharp bang echoed against the passenger side window. Abby screamed, and my head whipped to the side. There was a man outside her window. He was leaning in close, his face only inches from the glass. His clothes were just as antiquated as the others. A frayed suit jacket over a strange shirt, black tie hanging loosely around his neck. Hey, he said, voice muffled by the glass. Can we use your car? What the... I started, but my words caught in my throat. The man banged on the window again, harder this time. Let us in. Abby was frozen, her hands clutching the edge of her seat. Drive, "Drive, drive, drive," she whispered. And I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the car into reverse and floored it, the tires kicking up dirt as we sped backward. The man stumbled away from the car. The two figures under the street lamp didn't move. They just stood there, watching us retreat. I spun the car around and accelerated down the road. "What the hell was that?" I shouted, glancing at Abby. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. I don't know. Just keep driving," she responded. The dirt road lay before us, and eventually, those train tracks came into view. As we crossed them, I felt a strange sense of relief, like we'd escaped some kind of invisible boundary. In the rearview mirror, though, I looked back and saw the man who had banged on the window now standing in the middle of the road. Behind him, those two figures from the street lamp were moving, their long strides eerily fast. "They're following us," I said, voice shaking. Abby turned to look for herself. "Oh my God, go faster." I pressed down on the gas, the engine roaring as the car picked up speed. The road blurred around us, the trees a dark tunnel of motion, and I didn't dare look back again. Finally, after what seemed like forever, that dirt road gave way to pavement. The faint lights of a nearby town appeared on the horizon. I slowed the car, hands still trembling on the wheel. Abby looked back. "They're gone," she said. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if I believed it. Those figures were burned into my mind. Those weird hollow eyes and those strange old-fashioned clothes. We're not telling Luke and Emma about this," I said. Abby let out a nervous laugh. "Yeah, agreed." We drove in silence for the next few miles, the tension in the car heavy and suffocating. When we finally pulled into Luke and Emma's driveway, the relief was overwhelming. Their house was bright and lively, the glow of warm yellow light spilling out into the lawn. Laughter and music filtered through the open windows. I felt like we were stepping into a whole other world, one where strange figures didn't haunt the shadows of forgotten roadways. Abby and I exchanged one last look before stepping out of the car. We climbed the steps to the porch, and before we could even knock, Emma flung the door open, her face lighting up in a smile. "There you are. We thought you guys got lost," she teased, ushering us inside. "You have no idea," I muttered, quickly glancing over my shoulder. The dark street beyond the house looked deceptively normal, but I was still uneasy. The party was winding down, most of the guests already gone or gathered in small groups, sipping drinks and chatting. Luke waved us over, his face flushed with laughter. "About time you guys made it." I forced a smile, setting the gift bag on the counter. "Yeah, sorry about that. We ran into some complications." Abby gave me a look that said, "Don't." But Luke's curiosity was already piqued. "Complications? What do you mean, like what?" We just got lost," Abby said. "Lost?" Emma laughed. "Oh no, you didn't go past the train tracks, did you?" My stomach dropped. Why?" Luke's smile faltered, his tone suddenly serious. "Tell me you didn't go past the train tracks." "Our neighbors have told us time and time again to avoid it," Emma added. "There's a lot of weirdos out there." "Yeah, I trailed off, my eyes meeting Abby's. She shook her head. "It's nothing. It's fine. We're here now. It's all over." We stayed just long enough to eat and exchange pleasantries, but we remained uneasy. When we finally left, we took the long way home, avoiding those tracks entirely. As we pulled back into our driveway, I glanced over at Abby. "Never again," I said. She immediately agreed, her gaze fixed on the front door. And indeed, never again. I tend not to mess with the GPS or even Google Maps after that. I get everything pulled up well before a new trip and try to get familiar with it beforehand. Getting lost that night was easily one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me.